of the East Turkistan Government in Exile, following the report that the United Nations Committee responsible for monitoring countries' compliance with international covenants on economic, social, and cultural rights have released a statement raising concerns over China's treatment of Uyghurs and human rights defenders in East Turkestan. The Prime Minister joins us now from the region. Salih Hudayar, welcome to the program, Prime Minister. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm actually based in Washington, D.C., just to clarify that.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm glad that you are here and glad you're on the program today. Take a step back for us, if you will, because I don't know that there's the level of familiarity that we ought to have collectively about what is facing East Turkestan in particular. Tell my audience a little bit about how we got to where we are right now in terms of this United Nations Committee report.
Yes. So briefly about East Turkestan, up until December 22nd, 1949, East Turkestan was an independent republic. However, in October 12, 1949, the People's Republic of China, or Communist China, invaded East Turkestan and, with the assistance of the Soviet Union, overthrew our republic in December 22nd, 1949. And since then, China has been colonizing East Turkestan, and it has renamed it to Xinjiang, or the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And over the years, China has been waging a campaign of colonization in a simulation which has proliferated since 2014 into a wholesale genocide in which millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples have been thrown into concentration camps, into prisons, used as slave labor, forced labor, and are facing all types of atrocities that are defined as genocide under the UN Genocide Convention.
How on earth has this been allowed to happen?
Well, unfortunately, because this happened right at the end of the right at the start of the Cold War, many countries were, like the UN, they were too weak at the time to do anything about it, and other bigger powers weren't simply, interested in helping East Turkestan because it was very distant. However, in recent years, everyone knows, governments have known that, China has been waging a mass internment campaign and a genocidal campaign. And it was only in January 2021, 2 years ago, when the U.S. formally designated it as genocide. But at the same time, the UN, unfortunately, has been largely silent and in many ways complicit. More recently, the UN Human Rights Council received an $800,000 gift from the Chinese government for, purposely refraining from using the term genocide, purposely, ignoring the atrocities that's happening in East Turkestan.
What has been the reason the UN has given to potentially ignore that?
Well, the UN says that it doesn't have enough evidence. The issue that they suggested, that they stated, and that they don't have, enough resources to really investigate. But at the same time, they said, it's something that we need, to engage China with, and China's not, willing to talk on this. They even had a vote at the UN this past October, in which it was just a vote to see if the UN would even debate the issue of the human rights violations solely. And that vote was rejected because China was able to buy a bunch of votes from, countries that were sitting on the UN Human Rights Council.
And now that there has been more information, and of course there's also this report, though, the United Nations Committee that's responsible for monitoring compliance with some of these international covenants, they're raising concerns about what is happening in East Turkestan in particular, and calling on Beijing to immediately pass legislation that prohibits coercive measures, that dismantles forced labor and releases those who are subject to it. What has China done in reaction to that report? I assume they've rejected it.
Oh, yeah, they completely rejected it, saying that it doesn't, match with the reality, or their so-called realities in East Turkestan. In fact, you see them propagating that, they're providing jobs, they're, bringing employment, they're, so-called developing the region. and that they're going to ignore this and they're not going to accept any of these recommendations when it comes to the situation in East Turkestan.
Tell me about the numbers we're talking about. What are the numbers of people that are impacted by this, and those that are engaged in and forced to be involved in these labor practices? What is the scope of this issue?
Well, if we look at the Chinese government's own data, white paper from 2020, they stated that between 2014 and 2019, they sent 1.29 million people every year, or roughly 7.8 million people over the course of 6 years, to so-called vocational training and re-education, which is the sick euphemism that they use for the concentration camps and the forced labor camps. The U.S. Department of Defense came out in May 2019 and stated that they estimate that there's at least 3 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic peoples that are in these concentration camps.
Now, you're the Prime Minister, of the East Turkistan Government in exile. What influence or power do you have to try to obviously change what is happening?
Well, we have been actively, trying to persuade governments across the world, in the free world, to take stronger actions to hold China accountable. We successfully persuaded government like the U.S. government and the parliaments of over a dozen European countries to formally designate the atrocities as genocide. We got some sanctions on, Chinese officials that are directly responsible. We filed the case at the International Criminal Court, but governments are still moving slowly. We've been able to get the U.S. government to ban goods that were made from slave labor or forced labor in East Turkestan, but China has been working its way around this by transferring Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples out of East Turkestan into the Chinese provinces, to where they're essentially evading these sanctions and evading these bans.
I mean, just thinking about what is at stake and just the idea of the human rights violations that are alleged, I mean, it's just unbelievable to think that it's persisting in the year 2023 or at any point in time during history. Have any of those actions that the U.S. government or other governments across the country supporting supporting your efforts, has it made a difference? Aside from, you mentioned the idea of China moving people around, has it made any difference? Is it moving the needle in any good direction?
Unfortunately, I mean, it has raised awareness, but it hasn't done anything. If we speak honestly, it hasn't done anything to help the people directly on the ground. China is still continuing its mass internment and genocidal policies in East Turkestan. Millions of Uyghurs continue to be used as forced and slave labor. And that's why, for us, there's only one solution, and that's to, restore East Turkestan's independence, or else we can't guarantee an end to this genocide. We can't guarantee our people's basic human rights, their freedom, and their very existence.
How do you propose that could be done? Is there what is it you need from the world in order to have that support to actually make that happen?
Well, firstly, the United States and other countries in the free world need to formally acknowledge the fact that East Turkestan is indeed an occupied country. Many countries like the United States had consulates in East Turkestan up until 1949. Secondly, the United States and other countries in the free world need to bring the East Turkestan national question to the agenda of the UN General Assembly, to the UN Security Council. And lastly, they need to support East Turkestan in the same ways that they are supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion.
Aside from, obviously China and what's going on there, are there other countries that are supporting China in their efforts? You mentioned Ukraine. Obviously, people often think about Russia, not naturally Russia, and also, though, China's support or perceived support and influence as well. Is there another nation that is aiding China in its efforts?
Absolutely. Most of the Turkic countries in Central Asia, unfortunately, are, there are fellow Turkic countries, but they're siding with China. They have, helped China in rounding up Uyghurs that were in their countries and deporting them. You have countries like Muslim countries like Turkey and others who are actively engaged in security and intelligence cooperation who also have been doing the same thing, and more importantly, trying to influence, control, and co-opt our diaspora community and diaspora organizations.
Obviously, you talked about the forced labor and what's happening as well. The daily life of somebody who's a Uyghur or in that community in the area, it must be extraordinary in terms of the level of discrimination that's being treated in the everyday lives as well, even outside of instances of forced labor. What is it like for people living in those communities now?
Well, for those outside of the concentration camps, those outside of the prisons and forced labor camps, they're more or less in an open prison. Even in their homes, you have 2 million Chinese officials who have been sent to East Turkestan to live in the homes of Uyghurs, so-called relatives, to monitor their day-to-day activities. Over 850,000 children have been forcibly separated from their families and sent to state-run orphanages and boarding schools to be raised as, quote, loyal Chinese citizens. Over hundreds of thousands of Uyghur and other Turkic women have been forcibly sterilized, and tens of thousands of Uyghur and other Turkic women are being coerced to marry Chinese men, which is essentially state-sponsored systematic rape of our people.
I'm so very just saddened by what you've described and thinking about, what has been going on. And I am very thankful that you came on the program today to help to illuminate this to our audience, because I think far too many people don't know enough about what is happening. And I'd love to, is there a way people can learn more information? Of course, there's the report from the United Nations Committee that was issued. Reuters did publish something recently about it. Is there a way for people to learn more about the cause?
Yes, they can visit our website, east-turkestan.net, or they can follow us on social media at ETExileGov.
Prime Minister Salih Hudayar, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And it's so sad to think about and the conversation we've been having. And I deeply hope that the reports that are coming out of the United Nations and beyond will do something to change. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.